Welcome back to the Joe Mobley Show. I am Joe Mobley, your host and the original Uncloseted Conservative. Guys, thanks so much for being here. Thanks for listening to this audio-only podcast. If you're not subscribed, you got to open a podcast app in your phone, search for the Joe Mobley Show, and subscribe. Rate and review the show. Guys, 5-star ratings and reviews get a chance to be read on the show, and you get put into monthly drawings. Today's show is an exciting one. You guys know that I'm a huge legal nerd, so I always enjoy getting to speak to an attorney. I'm also a huge national security nerd. It's what my background is in, homeland security and all of that stuff that we don't talk so much about on the show. But hey, maybe we'll get to dive into some of that today. We've got the one and only Irina Tsukerman. She is a human rights national security lawyer, the president of Scarab Rising, a media and security strategic advisory firm. And just because she's not busy enough, she's also the editor-in-chief of the Washington Outsider. Guys, make sure that you go and check that out. If I had my screen share going, then you could see what I'm talking about instead of just hearing my lips go. But there we go. Make sure you check out the Washington Outsider. It's www.thewashingtonoutsider.com is where you can go and see her and her team's articles. I've read a handful of them. Very good reporting, very interesting insights. And there were a handful of articles that I had heard nothing about, which were huge. So maybe we'll talk about that as well. Since she's so busy, let's go ahead and get her up here, guys. Irina, how are you doing?
Great, thank you so much for having me on today.
Of course. I'm really glad to do it. I'm really excited about what you're going to be sharing here. And it sounds like we share a lot of common interest and things that we're passionate about. So I did some researching on you, but it's always best to hear straight from the source. Can you tell our listeners who you are? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I am a national security and human rights lawyer. Additionally, I'm a geopolitical analyst, and the my company Scarab Rising specializes in providing strategic advice on media, on security, reputational management, crisis management, such as crisis communications, um, analysis, intel analysis, for instance. So I do a whole bunch of different things. I also host a show of my own. It's a video podcast on the Coalition Radio. Airs Tuesday nights at 9 p.m. and it's called the Washington Outsider Report. The focus of that is on diving into national and global issues that are either undercovered, poorly covered, or generally are of interest but don't get enough. Um, Deep dive type of attention. So every week I speak one on one with a thought leader from an area. It could be an American, it could be someone from another country, and we discuss that issue in depth at least for about an hour or more sometimes.
Very cool. Very interesting stuff. So, this show, we typically talk about all things culture, politics, sometimes religion, and things in the news. Got to start with the culture war. There are so many people that disagree that there is something going on in the culture in America, in Western civilization. And I'm just curious for your take about what the culture war is, if it even is a thing, and what it's all about.
The culture is very much there, but what it is, how to define it, where it begins and where it ends, and where it's real and meaningful, and where it's just kind of emotional outrage du jour. That's where there's a lot of disagreement in that area. Now, I, I'd like to point out that sometimes culture wars are a misnomer because it's not always about culture per se. It's often about projecting political influence and social engineering more so than strictly speaking culture for the sake of culture. So the culture wars are always by definition political. And I'd say that the biggest aspect of the culture war is the influence of academic theories such as cultural Marxism and how they project into all other areas of life outside the academia. though academia itself is also plays an important part of it. And I think this impact, the impact of these ideas of ideology on the academic discourse and its transition into the public sphere is marks the point of extreme polarization that the US is experiencing today. Everything else that we are seeing today, politics, which are generally downstream from culture, um, social phenomena, grassroots movements, all of that is influenced by these ideas and impacted by these ideas from BLM and how it applies to the social sphere, to corporations, essentially going for social justice, donations, corporate social responsibility, and so forth. These aspects to the fields of energy, to the fields of culture itself, Hollywood, literature, organizations that award prizes for various cultural phenomena and intersectionality. All of this comes from these initially from a very narrow academic sphere, but it has been absorbed into the culture at large and became this point of extreme difference between people who are wholeheartedly embracing these ideas, intersectionality, so-called wokeism, and people who reject all of it completely. And there seems to be very little middle ground to discuss what what is it that these ideas are trying to accomplish and how we can combat them without causing more damage than the good that's being accomplished. The underlying reason for any cultural movement is a problem. It's an issue. It's something that a movement is trying to either create or overcome. In this case, some of these ideas are trying to address so-called social justice issues, and the word for that is also meaningless. Justice is justice, whether it's social or any other kind. If there is some unfair bias, if there is some sort of a systematic problem or a problem that is not systematic but just widespread, that affects a lot of people, it's an issue of fundamental uh, justice in whatever form. Social has nothing to do with it. But this kind of language manipulation is actually part of the problem. Regardless of how you see it, you have to understand that a lot of the people come to these culture wars with the idea of trying to fix something, to help somebody, and to project their own ideas on the world and to make an impact. So the underlying cause is always understandable. It might be even relatable and identifiable. It is how um, uh, it's actually applied, the methods that usually people have a problem with, and also who actually is behind it. Because just because a lot of people join what they think is a grassroots movement doesn't mean it's not in fact hierarchical, and there aren't manipulators and demagogues behind it pulling the strings and trying to take it into an extreme and damaging political direction. This is what we are seeing, for instance, with education, with the application of critical race theories in schools. Many of the people of the proponents of critical race theory have correctly pointed out that there are problems with the current state of education. That it's shallow, that it does not emphasize enough the experiences of various communities in the United States. All of that may be very fair criticism, and personally, I do think that there's always room for more in-depth understanding of complexities of US history, but outright fabrications, simplifications, generalizations, and um, complete discreditation of everything that's good about the United States is not the way to do it. And unfortunately, the application of the critical race theory, one example of this culture wars, for instance, does exactly that. The better response to all of this outrage, of course, would be a proposition of clear ideas about education that move us forward, that allow for nuanced, in-depth discussion, but draw the line at these fabrications and these manifestations of extremist and deliberately manipulative and deceitful thinking. Unfortunately, that would require politics to have nuance and the discourse to already not be so polarized. It requires a rational, um, thoughtful response. But what we get in response to one party waging a culture war is another party uh, exhibiting a very similar type of emotionally charged response. People call both culture wars tied into populism. I'm not entirely sure that the word is used necessarily correctly. A lot of the times, these ideas are not really popular with with the public at large. I think most people don't like extremism in any form. They understand when culture is being hijacked for some political end, and most people don't like it. But who gets to speak out about it is a different story. A lot of the times, people who have the time on the hands, the resources to do it, are the ones leading the discussions. They're the loudest, most active voices. So you get this exaggerated perception of culture wars, which are actually concentrated in the hands of relatively small numbers of people who have the positions, the means to wage them, and the public at large is impacted. It's affected by them, but they're not necessarily a direct part of it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with so much of what you said. There's just justice. There's not fill in the blank justice, racial justice, social justice. That we can't allow for the words to be changed. And I also love that you called it what it is. People argue about CRT, critical race theory, a critical theory, and other applications, maybe in the criminal justice system. It's cultural Marxism. Wonderfully said. It's exactly as you stated, and that's something that we need to do a better job. Not an emotionally entangled argument, but to bring people back to reality and say, "Hey, this is cultural Marxism. This is Mao's Red Revolution. This has been done before." Do you have any success? I'm sure you speak to people a lot about this. I speak to people a lot about this, and they are usually very emotionally charged. Do you have any success, any tips, any tricks for being able to break through that and get people to realize what cultural Marxism is, how it's invaded our country? It's in both political parties. It's in the culture. Culture is almost a worshipful thing. It's the thing these things that people value and trust and admire, and we engage in together. Do you have any success in getting people to realize culture's been invaded, education, politics, all of these things by Marxism, and helping bring them back to earth?
I think the issue is not whether people understand that it has. I think most people don't like the degree to what they're seeing some of the excesses in this.
Hmm.
I think many people will agree there is a problem and there is an extreme, because I think the people pushing for the most are really fringe groups, activists, academics, people, funders with a lot of money, but most people are, not really quite there. I think the issue is how to respond with most people, because I think even the efforts to formulate a response, most people are either too afraid to engage because they are afraid to that they'll be impacted, that they'll lose their jobs, their status, that they'll be excommunicated from whatever positions, because a lot of it has affected so much of the public sphere, from cultural institutions to regular corporate job environment to certain government agencies, that to education. They're afraid that their children will get kicked out of private schools or will have a very hard time in public schools, that they won't get into the university of their choice, or that they themselves will suffer political or social or economic consequences of responding. The other issue is the method by which to respond, because the natural instinct of so many organizations that have formed to stand up to these woke excesses, whether it's the critical race theory, whether it's the no bail or low bail, bail reform excesses, and whether it's the transgender activism and how it has permeated associations, even more so than politics, APA, AMA, and so forth, American Medical Association. But they don't know how to respond to it. They don't have the resources to understand, um, to combat the source of the problem. Most people are not medical professionals, they're not psychologists. They can't necessarily confront associations of like-minded people who have adopted this type of groupthink, and they don't know how to do so effectively and positively beyond saying that it's bad. But saying that it's bad doesn't fix the problem, and focusing excessively on the negative, on identifying the problem and denouncing it, does not really solve it either, because if you don't have an alternative solution, the other side has the first mover's advantage of taking concrete steps, entrenching those steps in the public mind and asserting itself. So you have to have a way out. You have to say, all right, we have this phenomenon. We have these people claiming that they're doing good in whatever way, addressing, minority concerns, whether those minorities are racial, gender, sexual orientation, or whatever else. What can we provide to make sure that that people feel they have a room uh, to be themselves and to be functional, productive human beings, but without focusing so much on these identity politics, on these pseudo-scientific theories and pseudo-academic nonsense that has uh, made people focus not on their achievements, not on their human potential, not on their contributions to the community, but on a sense of victimhood, because that's what this culture war ultimately comes down to, a sense of victimhood, just like Marxism created a sense of victimhood in particular economic groups. Now that is being transferred to I wouldn't say just racial or just gender, but everything outside this economic sphere, all social, basically subcategories of various people. So they're not actually being empowered to do anything, to accomplish anything. They're being streamlined into a sense of increasing polarization from the public at large, increasingly systematic, solipsistic focus on their own grievances and not on solutions and not on general contributions and making life better for themselves and for others. So they're actually being deprived of the tools to live their own best lives possible. So I think the real answer to all of this is to, how do you provide those tools? How do you make people?
Guys, 8 out of 10 Americans are completely dissatisfied with work, miserable, and they hate going into their job. This is a nut statistic. I can't believe so many people live that reality, especially since there are more jobs than people. That means it's actually easier for you to get into the career of your dreams, to get that dream job. This is something I can coach you through. No matter the company, the industry, no matter your education, qualifications, or experience. Guys, I've built a successful career in more than 5 different industries. I was always promoted ahead of my peers. I was always put in positions of more and more responsibility and leadership. This is something that I can help you achieve for yourself. Guys, you know and love me as the host of the Joe Mobley Show, and now we can have a one-on-one relationship with me as your career pivot coach. All you got to do is jump on a discovery call with me and see if this is the right move for you to make in 2023 and why this is the best time. Book that discovery call. Go to thejoemobleyshow.com/coach. That's thejoemobleyshow.com/coach. Book a time today. Guys, my time is limited. The spots are going to fill up, and then I'm not going to be able to coach you immediately. I'm going to have to put you on the wait list, but you're going to do the right thing. You're going to go to thejoemobleyshow.com/coach right now.
I feel like they can get attention through merit, through being themselves without feeling rejected if they do choose to embrace some aspect of their identity, complex identity. People's identities are generally complex. They're not just, I'm an American, or I'm a woman, or I'm a lawyer, or I am married, or I'm a mother, or something like that. They're complex. They're all of these things, and those things play out different at different times. What these guys are trying to do is simplify them and reduce complex individual human beings to labels. So how do we
Mhm.
overcome that?
So you mentioned the rise of wokeism, CRT, gender or transgender ideology, um, in so many different areas in education and pop culture. But to my surprise, I was one of those guys not 5 years ago saying this is a teenage thing. The real world is going to shake them out of it, and their job is going to shake them out of it, and they're going to have to participate in real society. And the corporations have folded completely. You're hard pressed to find a corporation or a very large company that isn't very woke. So, um, that makes me think that they are winning the culture war. And I'm just curious what your thoughts are about why they're winning. They have tremendous influence with the largest companies, the most affluent, groups of board members and such. Why is this thing, this culture war, this Marxist takeover? Why is it so successful? And what, if anything, can be done?
Well, I think the word that you used, corporations folded, is not even the right word for it. Because had they simply been bullied into accepting this, you could say
Mhm.
that they are actually victims in all of this themselves. They're afraid of losing donations, but the reality is they didn't fold. They're active participants in this, and they are contributors to this climate, and they didn't fold it because they're afraid. They folded because they see it to their advantage. They make money off of it. They make themselves look good. They create power networks with particular groups that are pushing this.
Yeah.
And the other aspect of it is that the other side, the anti-woke people or pro unity people, I really hate the anti-woke nonsense because it's a meaningless term, and being anti something is not it's not helpful. It doesn't mean anything. Um, but the other side, the people who want a better, more integrated society where people are judged judge themselves primarily on the basis of their individual accomplishments and character and ethics and principles and values, that other side has nothing to contribute to the discourse really from that side. They just, again, they are basically criticizing it, but what have they done to push back against it? Have they tried to take over corporate boards? Have they tried to put pressure through shareholder power? We have seen them. We have seen no until Elon Musk took over Twitter, for instance, we have seen no pushback from the boards and from the shareholders in Twitter against all of this, or Facebook, or any other social media, for instance. And that's just the beginning. Same thing with Disney. DeSantis tried to put pressure through political means, but from a business point of view, the other side has not been active in doing that, and that probably would have been a much better way to go than getting politicians involved and having these optics of playing favorites with companies that you agree that a politician agrees with or doesn't agree with. So where has been where do we see the role of business in this culture wars? Business goes after money. They go after self-interest. That's their job. And until something changes and until these corporations feel they have more to lose than to gain, they will just follow the money.
Hmm. That's a good point. Yeah. I hate to leave this part of the conversation, but I want to, we're a third of the way through here. I want to pull in some other avenues. There are big national security implications to a lot of what's going on in the political climate, in what we've been talking about with corporations, and how ideas have really invaded. Ideas that are antithetical to the Constitution, antithetical to all of the text of the Declaration of Independence, have really gone crazy in the United States. So pulling those things together, we've got widespread corruption coming in from here. We've got uh, uh, this really strange political system, and we've got things like TikTok and all of this foreign influence here. What do you think the national security implications are at the
I
center of all of this?
I think, quite frankly, national security always starts with patching up vulnerabilities in your own systems. Foreign actors are going to do what is in their best interest, and they will take advantage of the vulnerabilities in the system. So we have to look at ourselves first, and we have to look. Okay, China's agenda is X, Y, and Z. We understand that. What can we do to make it more difficult for them to impact us in a way that is damaging? And TikTok is just one aspect of it, because we have to question ourselves, why is there so much demand for something like that to begin with? China is taking advantage of things that they observe. We are an open society, and it's very easy to observe us. So they're seeing that there's a lack of meaningful engagement in other areas, and so they provide a resource, and they get people addicted to these tools that are used as espionage to gather even more data and to recruit more people later on to manipulate our society. But we allow ourselves to be manipulated. Congress is now considering an idea of making uh, think tanks and nonprofits accountable for reporting foreign funding. And these think tanks have been largely instrumental in echoing foreign policy from both sides of the aisle, as well as in impacting public discourse and understanding of foreign policy issues, whether it concerns Iran deal, influence campaigns by various actors inside the United States, economics and economic engagement with various countries, and so forth. So this measure might put more pressure on these think tanks to be transparent about who is influencing what they put out into the public sphere. But this is just the beginning. The reality, again, why is there so much demand for foreign funding? Why aren't people capable of funding these think tanks here sufficiently that there's no need to go to foreign funders? Why is our public discourse, our public policy so beholden to foreign interests to begin with? Why aren't we why aren't we putting out more thinkers who consider U.S. interests and consider U.S. role in the world from U.S. perspective? Where is it all coming from? Why do we have such limited opportunities, that we have a very limited group of people able to contribute to this public sphere, and as a result they become highly desirable, and as a result they come under a lot of pressure. They don't necessarily have the right values or training to evade these pressures, and so they give in and they become part of the problem. How can the public at large be more involved, more engaged in a healthy way that will make it more difficult for foreign infiltrators to come in? But the reality is, it comes down to education, to understanding. The more aware the public at large is of the foreign efforts to infiltrate and to cause problems and to shape our foreign policy and domestic policy for that matter, the less the more they will hold public officials accountable for that. Now there's only so much you can do though domestically, because at the end of the day the executive power, the power to make foreign policy lies with the executive branch, with the White House, with the president. So we are ultimately responsible for the people we elect, and for several consecutive administrations, the people who have come to power all have come from very similar circles. Whatever, every president likes to call himself either an outsider or an experienced, statesman. But both of these categories are misleading. In reality, what we need to be looking at in electing heads of state is how are they interpreting U.S. interests, what values they're putting into that, how are they going to manage the issues with the foreign policy that have been on a mismanagement course for the last 50 years, not the last 10, not the last 20, not the last 2 3 occupants of the White House, but for a very long time there's been issues and short bubble type thinking, not really open to radically reevaluating the system and creating a possibility where there's some sort of continuity in foreign policy, and where there is a way to put checks on abuses inside the system. Those abuses are going to happen. There's going to be tensions between agencies, between branches of government, between political parties. That's normal, that's healthy, that's necessary for us to uh, to maintain a balance. But unfortunately, if the system is becoming increasing, if there's increasing distance between public interest and this bubble mentality, then public interest becomes lost in demagoguery from either side, and the result is, of course, other actors take advantage of that, and our foreign policy is shaped not in the way beneficial to us, but beneficial to very narrow interests, often not our own.
Yeah, if you're into intelligence at all, there's a thing called a link analysis, which in layman terms, it's kind of like 6 degrees from, not you, the listener. I know that you are, but it's kind of like 6 degrees from Kevin Bacon. How many degrees of separation from one individual entity organization to another? Exactly what Irina said. When you look at the presidents, when you look at the political elites, their link analyses are all on top of each other. They're directly connected. All of them. There are no degrees of separation. Everyone has a direct relationship with everyone else, and it's been that way for decades, which is definitely something to look at. Now, you said you said these people behind the scenes pulling the strings, and we don't, as a point of fact, maybe that would hold up in a court of law. We don't know who these nameless, faceless players are, but I feel like you have an idea of who the puppet masters are behind the scenes, making all of this stuff happen. So in a totally, our opinions here. Who do you think is doing all this? What's the driving force behind what's going on?
Well, the driving force for a lot of this is always power and money. Power
Mm,
for state actors always being the first and foremost, but state actors also align with non-state actors. So if you're looking at the adversarial forces who are interested in manipulating and deceiving US and taking advantage of liberty, China, Russia, of course, Iran, Muslim Brotherhood, smaller actors like Qatar that have a lot of money and want to project a lot of influence. Uh, and in terms of non-state actors, corporations that want to rival state power and are willing to cut deals with state actors in order to exude that influence. And we see a lot of tension over spyware, for instance. Corporations claiming, that they're concerned about privacy and security, but in reality, each corporation wants to be the dominant force in controlling those things. Data has become an exchange value that rivals cryptocurrency, and it's in it we talk about cryptocurrency in its effect, but we should be talking about data and how data has become
mm.
exchange value, and why that is. The
What
reality
what
is.
what
Mhm.
role does data privacy and ethical data use play in this, or is that where you're headed?
I think data privacy is a misnomer because once you put something in the public sphere, it's no longer private by
Yeah.
definition, and that's on you, on not on anybody else. The question is, how is that data used and by whom afterwards? Because if that data is sold to foreign actors such as China, or if they simply take it from wherever, or if they hack into a public database and remove it by force, that data becomes their proprietary value that they use to shape their understanding of the US and later to target people. And same goes for anybody else, not just China, because once data is collected and shared with various actors, they use it for more than just it could end up in the hands of criminals. Sure, we've seen some impact of that, but more importantly, it's used to create and shape policy that
Mhm.
governs those countries and their exchanges with the United States, and a lot of it is hidden and unseen because it's not their policy is not necessarily what they announce in their public meetings with the president at the White House or in treaties or in UN gatherings. Their policy is how they use the information that they gather about a country to shape what they're going to do next. And we won't know what that is or how much they know.
I I tell people this all the time, exactly what you're saying. I was really upset. There were two major attacks in the last 10 years. Um, One was against the Pentagon, I think it was DoD wide, and the other one was Office of Personnel Management, OPM.
Mhm.
Huge, massive ones. So my data as a service member was captured both times. But the OPM one was really bad because people that have clearances, and then they're clearances that just go up and up and up and up, and the breadth of those investigations, and when you're getting polygraphed and they're interviewing your school teachers and things like that, um, you kind of get the idea. One, the government knows more about you than you even remember about yourself because they recorded it and did these interviews. But to just know, and we know China perpetrated that attack, to just know that they have these volumes of data on American citizens, on policymakers, on service members, on intelligence officials,
What's even
lawyers, board
mhm.
members. It's insane.
What's even more disturbing is that it's not an equal battle, because to the
Mhm.
extent the US engages in offensive cyber warfare at all, it's only to disrupt networks of known non-state actors such as criminal APTs. They may be linked to state actors, but they're not targeted as state actors. They're
Yeah,
targeted as criminals. So the U.S. very rarely engages in offensive cyber warfare, and usually only to send a message to destroy um, a particular target in response to, as an obvious state-backed attack that is formally acknowledged to be a state-backed attack. The
yeah,
last one of that sort I remember when Iran attacked a U.S. drone in the Strait of Hormuz, and the Trump
yeah.
administration attacked some targets in response. But it's very very rare because U.S. is
And
typically
then there are those one-off events like the spying on Angela Merkel, that came out. Those are,
well, spying on it
anomalies.
is one off. It's getting caught. That's that's one off.
Yeah.
But I think U.S. is rightly concerned about escalation, but unfortunately that ties their hands, and we become in a less powerful position vis-a-vis our adversaries who have no such concerns because they know us better than we know them. Not a good sign. Not a good sign. We should be reading Sun Tzu more often if we're going to be looking at China as an adversary, and this also means that they can foretell how we will use our power. That we should not be so predictable, in my opinion, and this means they know that we are not going to respond in kind. We are not going to be engaging in these sort of offensive operations that are so massive. Yes, we'll have our intelligence gathering and signals intelligence that picks up a lot of stuff, but who is going to be analyzing all of that? It's impossible, you know.
Yeah.
So, and we don't shape our policy the same way China does en masse, using this data to figure out how to target all these people. We just don't do it. It's not how we operate, and this puts us at a disadvantage.
Yeah, absolutely. So time is evaporating here. We've got about 10 minutes of interview left, and you're such a wealth of knowledge. So I want to pause really quickly, just remind people, follow Irina everywhere that she is. When you got your phone out, make sure that you go and subscribe to this show on the podcast app. Open your podcast app, search The Joe Mobley Show, and make sure you're subscribed. And while you're there, go ahead and rate and review the show. If you write a 5-star review, you get a chance to win some monthly prizes. We got about 10 minutes left, and you're such a wealth of knowledge. What are some things that people need to know that we haven't touched on? Because I definitely don't want to I don't want to leave anything on the table here.
Americans don't do complicated, and our adversaries understand that. They understand that for us to grasp some scandal or some revelation, it has to be broken down into bits and pieces and pre-digested, and they take advantage of that because a lot of the foreign threats against the United States are things that are not easily understood by the public. Everyone understands a terrorist attack because it's violent, because it's obviously political, because it targets concrete targets usually either civilians or some government institution, and it's not complicated. Everyone understands maybe even a cyber hack or by China, things like that. Propaganda, disinformation is not easily understood because it's frequently a mixture of truth, fiction, and what people and confirmation biases from various groups. It's manipulation that's highly sophisticated based on a mixture of data gathering and individual targeting and understanding of the political climate and public concerns and the relationship between the U.S. and their government, U.S. public and their government. So and more sophisticated active measures than disinformation, they're impenetrable and unfathomable to most public, because in reality the most sophisticated operations are ones we don't see outright, that are taking place among networks of actors, corporations, government entities, intelligence entities, different state and non-state actors, movements and organizations, members of the media, members of soft power institutions, whether it's the academia or cultural institutions. These sorts of operations, highly sophisticated, highly complicated, they are the ones that are actually driving a lot of the things that are going. We barely see the surface. Just to give you an example, one issue that I've been investigating in my various professional capacities has been the issue uh, of the hijacking of human rights causes, in particular like digital rights such as privacy and security, by NGOs that are pseudo academic, and by human rights organizations that are actually beholden to particular interests of some of their funders, which include specific state interests. So a lot of what we see here about human rights, about digital rights, about spyware out there is simply false. It's fabricated information that is being pushed through well-known channels by actors with an agenda. But how is an average person supposed to understand all of that? They're not. That's the whole point. So they see what these actors wants us to see, and most people are afraid of delving into that because it involves powerful, well-researched interests. And because, quite frankly, a lot of it sounds like a conspiracy theory,
Yeah.
if you start looking at it, and nobody wants to deal with it. We've got enough of that already. Parties accusing each other of spreading disinformation. Nobody wants to deal with a tangled network of manipulators who are using the media, who are using think tanks, NGOs to push through modeled agendas and to fight each other and to fight companies and to fight things that people just don't understand on the average, and yet that affect their daily lives, and they affect who they elect in office, and they affect uh, the very consumption of information and the output of that information that they get on a daily basis, and it shape so much. To understand a lot of what's going on, we need to look at it through the lens of history. We need to familiarize ourselves with the old playbook that the Soviet Union had used to perpetuate scandals and to attack reputations and to create mass upheavals that people didn't even know were attributable to a foreign actor. Right now, we're seeing a lot of that playing out on public stage in a much more complicated form. If you look at major scandals taking place around foreign funding, around spyware, look at it through the lens of what the Soviet Union used to do, and just remember, nothing you see is usually nothing what appears to be is usually what it actually is. Don't believe everything you think, to quote my good friend Anders Roma.
2023 is the best time to make a career pivot, maybe get to a job that you've never done and have no experience in. Every day you hear about a company that's making massive layoffs, and maybe you're thinking about changing jobs or even pivoting careers completely. Now is the perfect time to do it, and I'm going to show you how. Here are 3 quick tips on how to make a successful pivot this year. Tip 1, know the difference between active and passive methods. So many people think applying for hundreds of jobs on LinkedIn and Indeed and Glassdoor is an active method. It's actually a passive method. I'm not saying to stop doing it. I'm just saying to lower your expectations on the ROI of that time. Instead, an active method is calling, texting, private messaging, and emailing people who have the job that you want. This isn't spam. This is personalized, one-on-one messaging and conversations with people who have already successfully built a career in the job that you want. Tip 2 is network acceleration. You've got to become a master at networking to successfully get a new job, especially if you're changing career fields altogether. To get into this habit, we're going to start with friends and family. They already know who you are, so have new conversations that sound like this. This is what I've done, this is what I'd like to do. Then have the discipline to be quiet and let them speak. Process the information and give you genuine and authentic feedback. Tip 3 is purposeful self-promotion. Now that you've got the skills from 1 and 2, you are networking with absolutely everyone. You're doing a 3-part introduction. This is who I am, this is what I've done, this is what I'd like to do, and then you pull back and let the person engage. This sounds so simple, but so few people are doing this high win method. I haven't applied for a job since high school. I've always gotten my roles by being invited in to join someone's team. I use these very steps to go from law enforcement to military to management consulting, high stakes fundraising, key leader roles, and a whole lot more. This method works and it will work for you. Click on the link below for a free coaching session. Guys, this is just the beginning. I have a ton of value to give you. While you're down there, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. Share this with someone who is scared about making a pivot and who needs to know that they can change jobs and they can change career fields right now in 2023. Bonus tip, master conversational catch. When you have a goal in mind and you're going into these conversations, you tend to talk too much. That's out of nervousness and excitement. We've got to play conversational catch. You don't want to be a ball hog holding on to the ball, not letting the other person say something. That's not a conversation, that's a lecture or a speech. The more the other person is talking, the better of a time they're having. You're building rapport and your relationship is deepening. I've used these methods to have successful careers in more than 5 different professional markets, and I know you can too. Bottom line, don't stay in a job that you don't love. Even if you need to change career fields, it's not too late. Right now in 2023 is the perfect time to do it. Change jobs, change careers, or even build a business from the ground up. I can coach you through. Book a free discovery call at thejoemobleyshow.com/coach. thejoemobleyshow.com/coach. Book the call right now. You know, I'm so glad that that's where you steered the interview. One of the things that drives me crazy about the existence of propaganda and how staunchly people oppose its existence is obviously it's a thing. There are tradecraft manuals about it. There are well documented and researched propaganda campaigns that have been declassified, or enough time has come that the foreign state actors have just said what they did or whatever. But one of the things that's just staring people in the face is you look at the sales and marketing professions, and it's language, it's images, it's videos, it's a narrative crafted around something to get anyone to believe something, think something, start participate in something, start a behavior or discontinue a behavior, buy a product or stop using a service. And we know at some level, sales and marketing is propaganda, folks. That's what it is, trying to get you. It's trying to change your beliefs to get you to take an action or to discontinue an action. And everyone knows that, but everyone will deny the existence of propaganda. And you said it exactly right. It's because it sounds conspiratorial. And that's one of the things that I have the hardest time with speaking to people about. The Manhattan Project was a conspiracy at some point. Turned out it was true. 200,000 people worked on it. They spent $2 billion and no one heard anything. MK Ultra, turns out it was true. There's a reason that 194, 200 nations have intelligence agencies, and we have to think about, from the foreign intelligence service perspective, what do those people do? Propaganda. Part of their job is propaganda. It's very annoying. I'm sure you have these conversations as well, but people just want to shut down all conversation about it because they don't understand it. They don't know it. Is education and outreach the right avenue,
Well,
or do we just target something else?
I think it needs to start with the professionals who can then create the right type of education to reach the general public, because the way these foreign agencies work is sophisticated, and they know what they're doing, because they design psychological operations to damage the public based on extensive data gathering and extensive information gathering. They understand psychological operations are used to damage and deceive the enemy, in this case us. So how do they do that? They do that, but first by feeding on our insecurities. If you want to sell a product, whatever that is, you mentioned marketing analogy, you want to make people feel like they're missing something in their lives, and that their lives will improve somehow by getting that product or service. So the best way to exacerbate these divisions is to make people to exploit people's insecurities and psychological vulnerabilities. There's distrust of the government, good, exploit it. People feel like they're victims of something, of a government conspiracy, of corruption, of insufficient attention to their economic or social grievances. Then exploit that. And if you really want to mess with people's heads, distract them, deceive them by creating fake conspiracy theories that distract from the real ones, from the
Yep.
real actual conspiracies. Create, throw a red herring, market in something that seems, that feeds into confirmation biases about ongoing real situations that need to be addressed. And there you go, the public is going to be in on it, and they're not going to listen to anything anybody says, because they'll be seeing what's actually in front of their eyes, and that seems to make sense. So a lot of this
That
propaganda
that
is
hits
about
home
muddying the
for
waters.
me. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it's about muddying the waters. It's about creating complexities out of simple situations and simplifying things that are complicated.
Mm,
So a lot of the times it gets to the point that you can't tell the difference between reality and fiction, what you believe from facts, what appears to be, what appears to feed into your to what seems right, and what intuition is telling you right, from how and why that is being shared with you. I'll give you an example. Hillary Clinton's server. Without a question, there were real violations by the US government and by Hillary Clinton. But the question is also, how were the foreign interests benefiting from that? The other issue is the Russiagate scandal with Donald Trump. On the other hand, there were some things that were inherently true, but at the same time, you also have to ask, how did the foreign adversaries, not the two political parties, benefited from that from that variation? How did they use the information? How did they share that information with the public? What was the timing, and what did they get out of it? What they got out of it is increased distrust of the government, regardless of what anyone specifically did or didn't do. It doesn't even matter. What matters is what they got out of each of those domestic political issues that involve corruption and bad actors and whatever. That What did they get out of it? They got out of it complication. They got out of a stymied political system mired in investigations of each other, and people distrusting each other, not believing each other, not being able to see the whole picture.
mm. I when you said it really gets interesting when you start pouring in fake, propaganda, fake conspiracies, and when they layer that in, and these psychological operations are exactly what Irina said. They are complex, they are well thought out, and they're done by pros. It's not amateur hour at any of these agencies or state actors. But one of the big problems is exactly what you laid out. It takes away credibility, and it shifts focus from things that need to be focused on to nonsense. And I spent so much of my career fighting domestic human trafficking, and the counter messaging there is constant from television, from political systems, political adversaries, transnational crime organizations, other nation state. There are so many people that have equities in that. And then, one of those things when it dropped, it was exactly what you just described with, the servers or the Russiagate. It was the Pizzagate thing, and all of the trafficking organizations who had real-time intelligence, who had data and white papers and accesses to resources that lay people don't have. We all said, no, this isn't a thing, but it absorbed so much of the public attention about triangles and pizza pies and taken style human trafficking with yachts and these really elaborate things. And I'm trying to get people to realize in Oklahoma or Texas that actually familial trafficking is one of the most popular things here in this place. So that that's something that people need education on, because we're running like squirrels from one issue to the next to the next. And when we ever get to something that's real that we should be focusing on, then they'll drop something and the public attention shifts and the political attention shifts, and that thing that was almost brought to the surface goes back underground.
Unfortunately, one of the reasons people don't are not able to ask questions, basically evaluate the information, is basically, first of all, not enough time to delve into every political issue that we see. And the other issue is lack of critical thinking skills, because the education in the country has been dumbed down for decades on end, on both ends. And basically putting their children into some bubble over, over particular schooling does not necessarily provide critical skills to actually combat disinformation when you see it, because you become um, you don't develop the skills to actually operate in a complex environment, so you don't see your own side as having any issues, and therefore you become a puppet at the hands of people who understand your thinking and who can manipulate you. Then if you are in a mixed environment, you are able to see nonsense from all sides, and if you have the skills, if you're trained to do that through a logical process, that's why rhetorical training, debate training used to be so important. um, and sophisticated education was so important. Learning Latin, people learning Greek, it helped you understand the language, and people learning rhetoric, people learning logic, people understanding logical fallacies helped you evade rhetorical manipulation. Unfortunately, all of that is largely lost, and the more people are fed the primacy of emotions and emotional outreach to whatever it is, however important it might be, the less they're able to evaluate what's going on from a logical, rational point of view, and to look at the facts behind the appearances. So the
I couldn't agree more.
educational outreach for propaganda should start with these basics. You can't
Mm,
suddenly take an unprepared public and tell them, well, there's this huge conspiracy, and they're not going to even listen. So it has to, unfortunately, go back to basics to to educate the professionals on the substance, and the public on the general critical things that will allow them to evaluate information and not fall for it. They're obviously not going to be able to follow every political effort and scandal and adversarial foreign policy issue, but they are going to be able to, at the very least, say to themselves, this doesn't sound right.
yeah.
Why don't we skip the daily outreach and focus on something else?
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, the hour has gone by. That's all the time we have. I do want you to get a chance to tell people, again, what you've got going on, where they can follow you and get in contact with you.
Thank you so much. So, professionally, you can find me on scarabrising.com. That's my professional website where I provide my services. I also have separately my legal practice, national boutique national security law firm, Irina Tsukerman at law.com. The Washington Outsider is where I post my articles, and it also has a YouTube channel where you can see my programs from the coalition, my media appearances, and programs by the Washington Outsider itself, panel discussions on various subjects. And of course, on social media, I am on Facebook, as I said, YouTube and LinkedIn. I am not on Twitter anymore after asking one too many questions and being kicked off of it for unclear reasons 5 months ago, thanks to the efforts of people I was investigating at the time.
Irina, thank you so much for coming on. I know the listeners are going to really enjoy this. Guys, if you enjoyed this interview and you want to win a prize, go rate and review the show. Tell us something that you learned from this wonderful interview with Irina Tsukerman. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within us. To him be the glory in the church and in Christ Jesus throughout all generations, forever and ever. Amen. If that was the first prayer you've ever prayed, I hope it won't be the last. Until next time, this is The Joe Mobley Show.